Welcome to Whips in the Dungeon. I'm Dex, and I've got a few whips here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these whips, going to throw them a little bit, and tell you why I'm throwing them today. I don't throw these whips regularly in the dungeon. They're part of my collection. But as any collector out there, or anyone that owns a mess of whips, I would encourage every one of you to pull them off the wall, get them out of your personal whip armory, and throw them every once in a while. Even if they're not your favorite dungeon whip, whip deserves to be loved, handled, maybe some conditioner added to it, and it needs to be thrown a little bit so that it maintains its flexibility and its rollout. So I've got some whips that I don't throw a lot. You'll see some of them have tags on them. That's in case something happens to me, Moodstone would know a little bit more about the whip because she doesn't keep up with my collection as closely as I do. This first little 3-foot snake by Fava is a real nice snake. It's done in whiskey and brandy. And this one actually is the only whip I currently have for sale. If anyone's interested in this, by all means, write me about it. Any whip I sell out of my collection, I include a signed copy of my book, just as a thank you for helping me pass on a piece of leather. I mention Peter Jack a lot because he's my favorite whip maker. He's been plaiting 46 years, and starting with 44, his 44th year of plaiting, I had him plait the plaiting year number into the handle pattern, and so this one has a 45 on it. So this was built last year, and it's pretty good. Still breaking it in a little bit. He put a 3-ounce heel counterweight in the pommel on this whip, so it's a little bit heavier than what I'm used to throwing. Most of the whips I throw in the dungeon, the Turk's Head has a 2-ounce counterweight. I find with the 2-ounce counterweight in a 4-foot whip that I can throw it in a long dungeon play set and my arm doesn't get tired. The 3-ounce is going to wear my arm out a little bit quicker, and this is a 4.5-foot whip as opposed to a 4-foot whip. So with a whip that's a little bit longer than 4 foot, I do kind of agree with Peter that, you know, that extra ounce is important. This whip came from Witchcraft Whips in Sweden, Johnny Ohgren, and I'm still in the process of breaking this whip in. It's quick. It has a little bit more Viagra in it than, say, a Peter Jack would. So it's going to be just a little bit springier, maybe, in its recovery. I find it very accurate on the forehand side. On the backhand side, it's targeting a little bit short, which means when I throw my backhand, I can't have a consistent release point. Otherwise, the backhand comes up about a 1/2 inch short. So on the backhand side, I have to adjust by moving my hand slightly forward. I don't know if you can see, I'm making an adjustment on the backhand side. That way, both the forehand and the backhand will be consistent with this whip. Now, as this whip breaks in and gets more broken in, that backhand should get closer to where the forehand is, and I'll be able to go with a pretty consistent release point. So this little whip is Peter Thorndike, and it's honestly one of the nicer whips I own. Peter Thorndike, in my opinion, is as close to a Mike Murphy with his natural belly build as probably any other living whip maker. So if you're into Mike Murphy and you can afford a Thorndike, the problem honestly with Peter Thorndike is he he's won some plaiting championships. He's won some whip cracking championships. And he charges more per plaited foot than any other whip maker I've ever ordered from. So it's pricey. That's why I don't order a lot of whips from him. In fact, this whip will probably be the only whip I ever own. It's a Thorndike, but it's a very nice whip, just overpriced. Now this whip is a little short on the backhand side as well. Comparing it with the Witchcraft whip by Johnny Ohgren, they're comparable in construction. The Ohgren whip, if you see the Ohgren whip here, it has a little more Viagra. You can just tell from the curve of the belly that the Witchcraft whip has a little bit more Viagra in it, so it's going to be a little springier than the Thorndike. The Thorndike's going to have a little bit better natural rollout. The Thorndike pommel is a little bit lighter than the Witchcraft pommel. You could probably see that just by looking at the size and comparing it. This is a little lighter. This lighter pommel causes this whip to feel like it's very slightly tip heavy. Tip heaviness isn't a bad thing as long as it doesn't affect the accuracy of the whip. But this Thorndike whip is just slightly tip heavy. Now, when we're talking about these little flaws, this is because this boy's been throwing for 2.5 decades, and I have very specific nuances that I look for in a whip. 99 out of 100 people would pick up any of these whips and fall in love with them. So this little 3-foot Bullwhips made by Viper. I will say this about Viper. Viper makes very good whips. Viper's not plaiting anymore, and so don't even think about ordering a Viper. If you see someone with a Viper whip for sale and you can afford it, you should buy it. I will say Viper's, one of his characteristics is he doesn't like to put a pineapple transition knot from the handle into the thong. It's just, it looks like it's just smooth thong, but there's a handle here and then the thong begins. No pineapple transition knot. Desert Minx at Mojave Outliers makes a lot of whips that same way without a pineapple transition knot. I will say this Turk's head was not the original Viper Turk's head. Viper struggles, in my opinion, with his Turk's head in that he makes it too big around. It was too big to fit in the palm of my hand. So literally this whip was made in America. It went to New Zealand to Peter Jack, and Peter Jack rebuilt the Turk's head so that it would fit my hand, so that I actually could throw the whip. The other thing, this 16 plait whip, is if you count the number of strands in the fall hitch, you'll count 16. So literally Viper made a 3-foot bullwhip and didn't drop any strands. That results in a very large fall hitch, larger than you would expect, but then you have to plait all the remaining strands. So he achieved this taper by tapering each individual strand, and he did it in such a fashion that he didn't have to do any drops. Honestly, with a whip this short, doing drops well and adding a couple of drops would have honestly helped its rollout. So it's a nice whip. It's not going anywhere because it's one of a kind and Viper's not making whips anymore, but I don't throw it very often. I prefer throwing 4-foot bullwhips. So I have a 3-foot bullwhip. If I'm going to a venue and I know it won't accommodate a 4-foot bullwhip, then I'll take my Viper. So this is number 44. So if I just tell you number 44, you don't even need to know anything else about this whip, because you know it was made by Peter Jack in his 44th year of platting, 4.5 foot bull whip. And that's why getting thrown today. I do throw 4.5 in the dungeon, but not too many dungeons have enough space to accommodate a 4 foot. And this is a Latigo Idago build that has is a more recent build. It has the 3-ounce counterweight and the heel knot, so it's a little bit heavier bullwhip than what I throw in the dungeon for a long play set, but it's a wonderful bullwhip. Okay, so this is a number 44, and it's unique in that it's a Zenith bullwhip. There's only one person in the world that I'm aware of that's making a Zenith that has a tapered box knot. This Zenith is what gives it its characteristic. It allows you to throw it in all the different Zeniths around you. I don't throw this in the dungeon very often because the tapered box knot makes it, at least in my style of throwing, it makes it accurate on the forehand side, but there's a little too much flexibility in the thong, in the handle, transitioning to the thong for me to feel accurate on the backhand side. But for people that like sport cracking, that like bullwhips as opposed to stock whips, this will give you a lot of versatility, a lot of flexibility in doing sport cracking style cracks. It's not quite as, it's nowhere near as good for dungeon play as a traditional bullwhip. So this bullwhip's done by Desert Minx at Mojave Outliers. You can see I mentioned in the Viper video, there's no pineapple transition knot. So that's one thing these two whip makers share in common. They like plaiting and not coming back and doing the pineapple knot. This is a single belly whip. And as a result, it's light, very light. It's not going to wear your arm out. It's very accurate. Moodstone loves it to pieces. I would prefer a little more firmness and control of the rollout, and I think that would be achieved by a second belly. So while this is a wonderful whip and I cherish it and throw it, and Moodstone loves it, if I was going to order another whip from Desert Minx, I would ask for a 2-belly natural build, and I'm sure I would love it even more than I love this whip. This is a great whip, and she is a great platter, but for my personal preference, I would prefer 2 bellies as opposed to a single belly. So the last whip I'm going to show you is probably the nicest whip I own. Peter Jack did this one for me to commemorate my U.S. naval career, and he did it, the overlay, in blue and gold because that's the Navy's colors, and he plaited an anchor into the handle. So I know of no other whip that's been built exactly like this, so it's truly unique, one of a kind, and it's the highest quality whip that I own. I say that in that it's 32 plat. I don't own any other 32 plat whips, and it's a 3-belly build, 3-belly target bullwhip. And because it's 32 plat and it's got the light yellow, I don't take it into dirty dungeons and throw it very often, but it literally is the nicest whip I own. You definitely can tell a difference in the articulation in a 32 plat whip as opposed to a 16 plat whip. Does everybody need to go out and buy a 32 plat whip? No, of course not, because a 16 plat whip for the kind of play we do in the dungeon is more than adequate. But if you have a special occasion, like my Navy retirement, and a special event that you want to commemorate, or you have some special something going on, it doesn't hurt if you have the money and can afford ordering a 32 plat whip. You're going to love that whip, and it might be the only whip you want to throw. I personally let this one sit on the shelf more than it should, because I don't want to get it dirty. I do want to keep it pristine as a collector's piece, and at some point in my leather journey, this whip will be passed on. Hopefully, I mean, I would like to be able to pass it on to someone else that had naval service, because then it would have the same kind of meaning for them that it has for me. So I'm just giving a little air out today. Throwing some whips I don't throw very often, but that I do love nonetheless, and I do throw in the dungeon. As always, thank you for watching Whips in the Dungeon.